Jeff, thank you so much for joining us on the You're Not Alone podcast today. I am super excited to have you on. And honestly, I want to jump right into talking about your journey of living with your own obsessions, compulsions, fears, uncertainty, rigidity, things that you talked about when you were filling out the questionnaire. I think that this is a really relevant topic for a lot of people. And so I'm curious to hear about sort of when it all began and the journey that you went through to achieve more peace and clarity in your life now.
Sure. Well, thanks a lot for having me on here, Zach.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I should say that I use the phrase obsessions and compulsions because I didn't know what any of that was until much later in life. Honestly, until I was training to be a therapist, so I was and have never been diagnosed with OCD or anything, but had obsessions and compulsions with counting and just right and things being even and having to count a certain number of times with the right side of my right hand, left hand, etc. Things that I tried my best to hide from other people, but I don't think I was successful, and it just made me feel weird. It made me feel like I was not really part of things, or not really normal, I guess. And I remember there was one day that, and I don't know what age I was, but there was one day I was counting the number of times I chewed on the right side of my mouth and the number of times I chewed on the left side of my mouth, which is a very weird thing to say, right? But that's something that counting and having things to be equal or just right is something that those with similar things deal with every day. And the one day, I don't know what it was, but something snapped in me. I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is like, I feel like I really had to do it or else things just wouldn't feel right. But I decided no more. It was one day. I don't know why or how it happened, but I'm thankful that it did. And so it would be years later, as I was training to become a therapist, that I would hear some of these things and realize, I used to do that a lot more. And then I came to realize, I still kind of do a lot of these things. And it led me to realize there's this whole world of people out there who are living with OCD in a very severe way. Some in a very severe way, of course, not everybody. And I had no idea about it. I had no idea what that was or why we would do things like that, and it led me to treat OCD in counseling and work for NOCD as well as in a private practice, start a private practice, and really led me to understand that there are millions of people out there in the world who have this intense fear that something might be wrong, or some kind of uncertainty there that leads them to do something, a compulsion, either mentally or physically or both, that in an effort to try to stop the bad feeling or stop a bad thing from happening or to avoid uncertainty. And it's incredible in a very bad way. It's incredible how hard the mind works to try to avoid uncertainty, to try to avoid fear, to try to avoid something bad. So that's led me to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to clarify for myself, have you been diagnosed with OCD now, or was it just connecting the dots through going through schooling to become a therapist, where you're like, oh, I have OCD-like symptoms?
Yeah, I've never been diagnosed, so I can't say that I had or have OCD.
Yeah.
But I definitely have had the symptoms, and it wasn't until I realized in my adult life what those symptoms were when I was younger, primarily, that I realized, what, I'm prone to doing things during rituals and having to count things or do things in a certain way because I feel like I have to. So no, I'd never been diagnosed, and if I hadn't learned about it, maybe that fear would have taken hold of my life at this point. I don't know, but I'm thankful that I learned what it was so that I could do that for myself, but also do that for other people. I'll give you an example. For some reason, pools are like they just feel disgusting to me.
Yeah.
And there's no reason, right? They're filled with chlorine. There's no, it's not like there's necessarily diseases sitting in them.
Yeah.
But I have the hardest time touching my feet to the bottom of a pool. And so I'll do like, a few toes on the bottom of the pool or whatever.
Yeah.
And if I didn't know that I needed to challenge that I needed to expose myself to that, I might have let that fear take me over. But thankfully, the knowledge might have prevented some of these things. Might not, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm realizing that more and more, that my mind is kind of geared that way. And I need to be proactive about it. And that helps me, I think that helps me understand maybe the perspective of others when they say, I just feel like I can't do this. Well, you're right. You do feel like you can't do that. But that doesn't make it true. It doesn't make it true that you can't or that something bad's going to happen. It just means that you're experiencing fear. And let's work on challenging that so that you're not living by fear. You're living in the freedom of doing things the way you want to do them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the biggest component of breaking free from the shackles of OCD is leaning into the fears and the discomfort. So for you, was it more, did these like kind of the different chewing and the feeling sensation on the bottom of a pool, does that give you anxiety, or is it more of just like this feeling of like, ugh, I don't like how this feels if I don't do it right this time, or if I don't do it differently, I'm just going to feel this uncomfortable feeling for the whole day?
I would say that it's both. There is that discomfort, but also some anxiety.
Okay.
I would be, I guess, prone to ruminating about it. Like, what's on my feet, or what's in this pool, or even touching the side, like where you might touch the side to get out of a pool or something. That really freaks me out. And obviously it's not logical, but it does. And so there's some doubt there, some intrusive thoughts there of what's on here. What's going to happen when I touch it. And so discomfort and some anxiety, and just like we do with OCD treatment, touching my feet to the bottom of this pool, I'm touching the side every chance I get. And it's uncomfortable. It brings anxiety, but that doesn't last forever, of course, which is, of course, the point. Challenge it. Do the exposure. And it's not going to last forever. It's going to feel bad in that moment. But you're retraining your brain that's not necessarily reality. It's just something that I'm feeling.
Yeah, that's a good point. In hearing your story, it definitely drives home the point, too, that I think people's OCD is on a spectrum in terms of there are some people that I know who their exposures feel like the world is absolutely coming to an end. For me, I felt like mine was somewhere in the middle, and it seems like for you that it's definitely something that causes discomfort and anxiety, but you know what you have to do to get it done. And I think that's really interesting how we all have different experiences with our OCD. Do you ever treat anybody where it's like they're kind of on the extreme end of things, where it feels like the most terrifying thing in the world to do an exposure?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you with the continuum. That some people, absolutely extreme side of things. That's usually the case where it'd probably be best for somebody to do some kind of inpatient treatment, or at least some kind of intensive outpatient, because clearly they need support that will probably need to last for more than the hour that I can give them at that time. But helping somebody understand that you can live differently from what you're currently experiencing, that's, of course, a helpful piece of it, even if it means I'm not your best option. There are other places you can go, people that are better trained in more of a few hours a day, or somewhere that's residential even. That's going to be a better option for you so that you can live in that freedom and get closer to those goals of not living by the oppression of OCD. Yeah,
totally. How do you recommend that somebody make that differentiation, like between doing it themselves and or actually seeking help? Because I know there are a lot of books out there on OCD and how to do ERP? What do you think is sort of that tipping point?
That's a great question. Well, I guess learning about ERP, I think, is a great place to start. And practicing some of those things, kind of doing your own exposure work, is a good idea, of course. But somebody who's living in that fear currently might have a pretty difficult time getting from point A to point B, kind of pushing themselves to do these really difficult things. Yeah, perhaps going along with the continuum idea, maybe if it's somebody where the OCD is a bit more mild, somebody might be able to do that. But as you get more to the moderate and certainly the extreme, or the severe, I should say, it's the kind of thing where you have the support and the knowledge of a therapist that might be able to help you understand your specific themes and help you understand generally how the process goes, what people normally experience in these kind of situations, maybe even connecting the dots between sometimes people have different themes, and you might something from one theme might play into another theme, or even a personal experience you had previously in life plays into some of these things. Perhaps a core fear or some kind of better understanding of why that fear is present in your life could come into play. So I think the personal touch of a therapist is so important in many situations, but I think it is equally important that the individual, the person seeking help, that they not only understand what OCD is, but they get different perspectives on it. So the way that I think of OCD, the way that I treat it, the way that I describe that person's themes, is certainly going to be different than the way somebody else might describe OCD. We're saying the same things, of course, or similar things, but I may use different examples that connect with somebody and somebody else, a book, a podcast, a video, or something. They might use different examples that might connect in a different way, and I think that's pretty vital. Mm-hmm. So I think using all resources to really engulf yourself in an understanding of what OCD is, how it affects people, and how to work through it. So I would think, to answer your question, I would think that maybe somebody might start with reading about OCD, about ERP, understanding it, and trying to do some of their own exposures. But I would think that if it proves to not really get you where you want to go, having the support of a therapist is pretty essential, probably in most cases. And certainly that's not a bad thing. It just means that someone who has a specialty in this, someone who has experience in this, is going to be able to guide you in the right direction and help you toward that goal of improvement. And that can really be life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah. You touched on core fears. Can you share a little bit more about that? What would be a core fear that somebody might have underlying in the intrusive thoughts that they're struggling with?
Yeah, absolutely. First one that comes to mind, well, let's start with OCD always attacks our values, things that are most important to us. So perhaps one of the most prevalent examples that I see has to do with safety of loved ones. Could be somebody's children, could be a parent, a sibling, husband or wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, etc. And of course, those are among the most important people in our lives. So a core fear might have to do with the safety of one's child. For example, somebody may have an intrusive thought about their child's preschool or daycare or school, something bad happening to it. Somebody coming in there, a fire, you name it, the possibilities are endless. And that's scary to everybody. When I think about that with my own kids, that's scary. I would hate if that happened, absolutely. And sometimes, of course, OCD might take that because there's uncertainty and because you really care about those people in your life. OCD might take that and really try to run with it. Hence intrusive thoughts, hence the fear that one experiences with OCD and the focus on that uncertainty. So it could be something like the safety of one's kids or one's loved ones, perhaps. It could have something to do with health. Of course, a prevalent one is an obsession based on contamination. So one's health is, of course, important to most people. And is there a chance that we will all get some kind of disease? Absolutely, yeah. And that's scary. Scary to think about, I could have a disease and really suffer. That's an awful thing to think about. In walks OCD and grabs onto that and, oh, what if this? What if that? And now you feel like you have to do a million different things, take a million vitamins, spend hundreds of dollars a month on treatments you don't actually need, just to try to avoid that uncertainty. So getting to an understanding, really kind of boiling it down, an understanding of why that may be in your life can often be very important to help somebody understand, yeah, my kids are really important to me. My health is really important to me. My safety is really important to me. Having a good support system, friends, and so forth is really important to me. And just because that's important to me, and because there's uncertainty, doesn't mean anything bad is going to happen. It could, but it doesn't mean it's going to. And that's kind of where core fears come in, to understand perhaps where all of that comes from, or have an understanding of why that might be important in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask that question because I understand, and I think that it's really important for somebody in their recovery to understand that OCD does attack your values. And it goes after the things that you care about the most in life. I read an interesting book. I can't remember the title of it now, but it's on this bookshelf. And the author talked about, basically there were 5 core fears that he identified that people have with anxiety. I can't remember them all, but I know it was loss of purpose. I want to say it was loss of purpose and loss of meaning. I can't remember how he differentiated those two.
Right.
It was loss of love, and then I know one of them was death. I can't remember what the 5th one was, but he used kind of like the downward arrow technique. Well, why is this upsetting to you? Answering that question. So, well, this thought is upsetting to me because if it came true, this would happen. Okay, then ask yourself, why is that upsetting to you? And I know with OCD, we're not problem solving with the thoughts. I mean, that's how you quickly get stuck in the loop or in the cycle, the vicious cycle.
Right.
But it was actually a really useful exercise for me because it made me realize, and I was able to tie it back to what I valued, but I was terrified of loss of love. And then I was able to connect different events in my life, both in my childhood and then late teen years. I experienced I experienced a heartbreak when I was like 19 years old, and I guess I felt that visceral experience of rejection, and kind of wanting to not be rejected, wanting to be with that person and not kind of getting that back. And so I realized, wow, I feel like it's almost like OCD is giving me all these subtypes of thoughts, all these different genres of thoughts to distract me from unpacking, the pain inside. Now, I'm not recommending that for other people. I still think that there's a specific way to address the intrusive thoughts, which I want to talk to you about here in a second, Jeff. But it was helpful for me to realize, wow, there's this driver here, I think, behind my anxiety, and it's this deep fear of losing love and being rejected, which came from doing that exercise. So that's why I wanted to ask about that. I wouldn't say that it didn't cure me of my intrusive thoughts. That still occurs. Right. But it did give me a deeper understanding of why the anxiety and why the fear is there.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Good.
Yeah. So let me ask you about this. What are the key ingredients from your perspective to recover or regain your life from intrusive thoughts?
Yeah, good question. And I like your clarification there, because, as you said, OCD is the kind of thing that, well, we'll use intrusive thoughts as the example there. Intrusive thoughts are always going to be there. So regaining your life versus being cured is an important differentiation. You're not going to be cured from intrusive thoughts. Nobody will be. We can't control our thoughts, of course. But some would say being able to manage it or just regaining your life. That's a good way to put it, too. So key ingredients there to regaining your life. Well, understanding of what it is, understanding that you're having these thoughts. You can't control them. You didn't ask for them. You don't want them. You don't like them. But they're there. And the objective understanding of they're there, I can't do anything about them, and that's all I know. I'm not going to try to figure anything more about these thoughts. They're just there, and that's all I know. And then from there, being able to challenge all of that. And what I mean by challenge, I certainly don't mean that that we're fighting against thoughts or trying to take these thoughts away or trying to stop thinking or something like that. Of course, that's not possible. I mean challenging the ideas that these intrusive thoughts are putting in our mind. So if the intrusive thought is that I'm concerned about I already used kids, I already used contamination. Intrusive thought is that my the amount of power consumption that I use in a day is going to make global warming out of control. For example, so I don't turn on any lights ever, and I live in this horrible way because I'm so afraid that I'm going to destroy this whole thing because of my power usage. Which is one that I've seen at least a few times. So if that's the intrusive thought, you recognize that you're concerned about this, right? That the intrusive thought says, the fear says, I don't know how my power consumption, my power usage during the day contributes to greenhouse gases or whatever. So I understand that, and that's all I know. I'm not going to try to figure it out. It's just all I know right now. That's my fear. And the challenge part comes in there with what I think I should do, what the fear tells me I should do. My reaction to that is not turn on any lights. Don't use a computer. Don't turn on lights. Don't drive my car, because what if I'm the person that puts it over the edge and the whole world is ruined? It sounds obviously very extreme, but that's what OCD does. It's not practical, it's not reasonable, but that's what OCD does. Jumps to these conclusions. So your way of challenging that is, well, I don't really know. I don't really know if this is true. I feel like it might be true, but my job here is to challenge it. So, okay, I'm going to start by turning on the lights when I enter a room, which feels awful to an individual experiencing this, but you know what? That's what I'm going to start with. And it's going to feel bad. It's not going to feel pleasant in any way, but that's what I'm going to do. And there's a part of it that you're like, well, I guess I just got to see what this is like now. I turn these lights on. I'm using power during the day. Okay, this is uncomfortable and I feel awful, but it's just what it is, and I'm not going to figure anything else out. So then you might go up from there to, I'm going to turn the TV on for 15 minutes. I'm going to watch something for 15 minutes. Again, if this feels terrible, I feel anxious, I feel uncomfortable, but this is what I'm going to do. And there's an aspect there of, one expert called it a sense of agency, that you feel like you're the one who has power over this, not the other way around. Not that the OCD has power over you, but you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to challenge this. And OCD is not in charge. I'm the one who's in charge here. I'm doing this. It feels uncomfortable. I'm still feeling the uncertainty very strongly. But I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to sit here in this discomfort and live with it for right now. Okay. So you might turn on the light every time you enter a room for a week or so, and then you build up from there. Turn on the TV for 15 minutes a day for however many days. You build up to maybe a half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour a day for the TV, so forth. You might start using a computer at some point. Again, more power consumption, etc. You might start driving your car, etc. And in that way, you're challenging, you're pushing back against what OCD says you should do. Well, let me rephrase that. You are kind of doing the opposite of what the fear tells you to do, right. And you're just deciding you're going to live with that. You're not going to do anything about it or try to fix it or solve it or analyze it or anything. And that's all you know. And I say not pushing back on it because you're not trying to fight against the fears. You're not trying to fight against the intrusive thoughts. They're just all going to be there. The fear, the anxiety, the uncertainty is just going to be there. And that's all there is to it. And it's the fear is probably going to try to sneak up in a different way. You've never thought about how much energy your neighbors use, so maybe you should go talk to them about using less energy, which again sounds ridiculous, but that's how OCD works. That's how the fear and the uncertainty works, and it really snowballs. It can snowball from there. So being aware of it, acknowledging it, not trying to answer it, and challenging it, understanding that it's just going to be there, and I'm not going to do what the fear says. I'm going to try to live in the way that I want to live. Consequences may be there. It may turn out really poorly. It may turn out all right. I have no idea, and I'm not going to do anything to fix that. Obviously, a very simplified view of what that would actually look like could be a long process, of course, but it is the way that unfolds so that one can live in that freedom.
Yeah. It's when you put it that way, the way I look at it is it's an active passive process, meaning the challenging piece is the active part, and that is where you flip on the light switch, to use your example, or you get behind the wheel of a car and you drive, even if you think it's contributing to global warming. You consume a lot of energy, and that you flip on the TV, all these examples, when your brain is telling you to do the exact opposite. So that's the active piece. The passive piece, though, I think has to do with what's going on upstairs in the brain, where you're arguing back and forth. And that's the part that I think is really important that you touched on, is like doing the action or the active piece of challenging it demonstrates to the brain, like, I don't care what you're saying or messaging to me, I'm doing this thing. But then the passive piece is, while you're sending me all these distress signals, I'm just going to sit here in this feeling and do absolutely nothing and allow my brain to naturally, over time, become bored with these thoughts. And what I like about this whole process is, like, to your point, yeah, it's something that you build up to, but once you have the skill, it becomes a lot easier when the themes change to be able to address it head on and know exactly what to do. Right. And I think that for people, the most shocking part of having OCD is especially at the beginning when you don't know what's going on. But I think once you start to develop those skills, it can become a lot easier to address whatever genre of intrusive thoughts that you're struggling with. But I like that example, because I've heard of a lot on this podcast. I've heard a lot of different intrusive thoughts. I have never heard about energy consumption, global warming. Would you put that, is that in the harm category? Where does that fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really like your description there that you just gave of of all that process. The category, I don't know. Harm,
and it doesn't really matter,
harming,
right?
Yeah. Well, you're right. You're right with that. But yeah, harming the environment perhaps, or I don't know. But it's one's impact on the world, which you could, I guess, relate that to one. So if you think about a health theme, one's impact on yourself. So yeah, harm, I don't know what you would call it, but it's like you said, the the themes may be different, of course.
Yeah.
But the flow of things is the same. There's nothing new with OCD, nothing new with fear. The flow of things, the way that you get to that is the same, no matter the theme. And therefore, like you said, you can challenge it. You can work on it in similar ways, no matter the theme, to some extent.
Totally. One thing you touched on in your notes was the use of sarcasm and humor in OCD treatment. This was a huge component of my recovery. And my therapist, because for me, and I think for a lot of people with OCD, the genre of intrusive thoughts changed. And so she said, she would always tell me, the content might change. In fact, prepare for that. But the way that you respond is always the same. And one way that you can respond is with sarcasm and humor. Because for me, my first set of intrusive thoughts, or the genre, was sexual orientation. So I identify as a straight male. All of a sudden, I wake up in 2016 and I'm being flooded with thoughts that I like men, that would be something that would be enjoyable for me, that I'm no longer in love with my now wife. So I was just like shook to my core. Again, you talk about attacking values, where I was like, well, I don't want to lose the love, talking about the loss of love. Of course, I couldn't connect those dots back then, but I don't want to lose the love of my life. That's not what it made me really sad. It felt ego-dystonic, out of alignment with my values and who I saw myself as. And she taught me through my ERP to start, anytime I had those thoughts, to start laughing. And what's interesting is that I did it for so long, it felt fake and not real. It felt like a forced fake, phony laugh. Why am I even doing this? I'm scared as shit right now. But once I kind of hit this hump where now I genuinely laugh at those thoughts. Like they kind of actually crack me up. And it's because it taught my brain that this isn't something that I need to worry about or freak out about. How do you see sarcasm and humor as a tool?
I love that works so well for you, getting to that point of, I can deeply feel that this just doesn't matter. These are just thoughts. I love that. I use it most often, or rather, the example that comes to mind right now is with kids. When working with kids and adolescents, younger people with OCD, because obviously kids think kind of in a more black and white way. And so you're able to use these ridiculous examples in a funny way that my hope anyway is teaches them kind of the same thing you just said. We're laughing about these things. That feels different from what's going on in my mind. Maybe that means that this fear is not genuine. So an example, there was somebody I was working with months ago, and younger child, and they were concerned with a lot of different things, some of which what might happen to trash when they throw it away. And the compulsions there were that they would try their best to keep trash. They would put it in their pockets, they would keep it in their room, outside, wherever they could. And so, of course, we were talking about things. We were doing the whole psychoeducation piece where we're understanding what OCD is and how this fear is trying to take hold of this child's mind. And so at some point I asked, how do you know what happens to this trash? And they said, I don't. I just think that this trash must feel bad when it gets thrown out. And I said, how do you know that the trash feels bad? And they say, I don't know, I think it just feels bad. And I said, well, did you ask it? And the kid starts to smile, like, no, I didn't ask the trash. Trash doesn't talk. And I'm like, well, did you try? No, because trash can't talk. Okay. Well, can you go try now? And, of course, very confused. And they're like, why would I try to talk to trash? And I said, it's worth a shot, right? And they were very confused. And they did it. They went over and they picked up this piece of trash and said, it was some hesitation because, of course, it felt weird to this child. And they asked, how do you feel when you get thrown out? Of course, the trash didn't answer. And it was this whole funny thing that this child referred back to on multiple occasions. And through that, we were able to discover that there were some similar themes with like things getting put into a bonfire that they were having as a family, and what happened to that stuff after it went in the fire, how that stuff felt, or what happened to the water when it went down the drain, and the water feeling bad because it's going down the drain. And it was this whole funny thing, and of course you're sitting there talking to trash, and that theme for this child went away pretty quickly. Now they may of course have had intrusive thoughts about it, and tough to understand with a child of that age, but it was not something that they really dealt with for very long after we had kind of addressed it that way. And who knows if it had to do with the humor or with whatever, but it was something that was meaningful at that time, and I thought it was pretty funny in a very dry, weird kind of way, but so did they, and that really worked. To your point about sexual orientation, the exposures, as I'm sure you well know, the exposures with that can get quite weird because of course you're fearing these things about the opposite sex, and of course you don't like these thoughts, and so naturally the exposures are going to be about weird things that you don't like, so it's usually with guys, and the way that in exposure work, the way that a guy might describe an experience with somebody of the same sex, if that's if it's somebody who's heterosexual and they're worried, what if I'm homosexual, the way that they describe a potential experience with another man, that is, it feels weird to them, of course, and they don't want to talk about it, and oftentimes it's very funny to them, ultimately very funny to them, because now they're describing things in using these terms that are just funny, just because guys tend to laugh about stuff like that already. And ultimately it kind of becomes this, I'm just going to describe it in these very weird terms, and ultimately sometimes it's funny. It's just this humorous, sarcastic, you know what? I'm just thinking these things, and I'm just saying these things, and that's all I know right now. So I think it's a pretty powerful tool. It can be a pretty powerful tool. Obviously not for everybody. Certainly there are times when something's very serious in that moment, and obviously we know the difference between having to put on our serious face and being able to be sarcastic and joking. But for some people in some situations, that can be very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I think humor is a powerful tool, and I had a guy on that the other day who had sexual orientation thoughts as his first genre, and he cracks jokes with his buddies all the time about, hey man, I think I'm starting to catch feelings for you or something like that, and they have a deeper understanding of OCD, so they laugh along with him, and I think that that's been really important in his journey. So I appreciate you sharing that. As we sort of wrap up the podcast today, I'm wondering, what is one piece of advice that you would give somebody who is right at the start of their OCD journey right now?
Yeah, great question. I'm a huge proponent of I had said this before, but I'm a huge proponent of gathering information from a variety of resources. So if you really like to read, I would suggest reading some good books about it. Books that come recommended perhaps from other people, or maybe go to the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation website, and see what they might recommend for books. Similarly, for YouTube videos or podcasts, there's a ton of them out there, of course, and some really incredible ones. And in that way, you get to learn more about OCD, but also about the people who know a lot about it, both through experience, personal experience, and through professional experience. And you kind of get to jump a little bit into this community of people who experience it, treat it, understand it. Excuse me. And by not only having that information, but by being in that community as well, you feel more connected. You feel more supported. You feel more like, wow, there's a lot of people dealing with this. I'm not alone in this. Obviously, title of your book, you're not alone. And that can be really powerful. That can be kind of life-changing to help for somebody to understand that there are other people who I may know personally or just know through their book or their podcast or YouTube or message board, whatever it may be, and that's pretty powerful. So using your resources is vital. There are OCD organizations, so IOCDF, but also state-ran ones or kind of regional ones even. So maybe there's one nearby that you can get involved with, again, in person or just using that as a resource, whatever it might be. If someone was kind of starting out with things, understanding that they have OCD or trying to figure out if they do, I think seeing if there's a therapist in your area, an OCD therapist, or if you can get one virtually. Of course, NOCD is a great option for that, but there's also a lot of other therapists otherwise who treat OCD. And I would say seek one out. And even if you're not ready for it at that moment, you at least have that resource or those resources available to you. I'm super thankful that OCD treatment is very accessible at this point for most people. Not only in the U.S., but worldwide as well. And of course, the goal, of course, is to expand that reach, to be able to get people help where they need help. And anything you can do to maintain that hope, because a diagnosis of OCD or just experiencing OCD, it's not the end. It's not like your life's over and you'll never be able to achieve happiness. You most certainly can. It will not be comfortable for a period of time there, most likely. But fear should not run people's lives. Our lives should be run by the things that we enjoy, by the things we like doing, the things we're passionate about, the things that we wake up and want to go do. Nobody ever wakes up and says, you know what? Today is a good day to live by fear. That's what I'm going to do. Nobody gets excited about that for good reason. So living by the things that do get you excited, that's where I would hope everyone that I see would get to in their life. Not living by fear or by the uncertainty or the what ifs, but I'm doing things I like to do. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because of X, Y, and Z. But you know what? I don't live by that. I don't let that rule my life. And that would be my hope for everybody.
I love that. That last piece is so important too. Waking up, living a life from a place of excitement and not fear. I think that's really important. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. I look forward to having people listen to this episode in the future when it drops. And again, just thank you so much for coming on and providing your perspective and helping people on their path to feeling less alone and recovering, reclaiming their life from OCD.
Yeah, thank you, Zach.